Harry has spent a lot of time implementing technology and does a lot of our technology strategy. So he's standing in for Rich, and he's going to talk us through what we think the key components of a technology stack should be based on the trends we're going to see. And then I'm going to wrap it up with just a one-slide view on how I think the market looks, if that makes sense. Okay, Harry, do a good job.
All right. Yeah. Cool, thanks very much, Simon. Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you. So, as Simon said, we're just going to pick up on a few of what we thought were the key themes. So obviously lots and lots of themes came out of what Nick was talking about, but what are the ones that we think are really directly impact us, and therefore how can technology, or how should technology be trying to help it, basically. So as a quick reminder, so we talked about the continual growth of increase in growth of e-commerce. So just that overall customer trend, especially and businesses sort of switching more into almost what we've seen in become used to in B2C. More desperate customer base. So where are they? Where are they working? What are they wanting? How do we identify that? What products do they want? And therefore, how do we make sure that we are we're in a situation where we can actually provide those products in all the way through the supply chain. The supply chain itself, obviously, so that's one of the key things that Nick talked about. So getting to the point where we understand that it is changing, we understand that it is disrupted, and we can try and work around that as much as we possibly can. And then linked to that, obviously, cost price inflation and fluctuation. So these were the key ones that we've taken out of this morning that we're just going to explore a little bit more, and dive into some of the specific technology areas that we think technology needs to support it. So at the absolute top level, how does technology need to adapt in order to try and help us to deal with these trends? We need to make sure actually we do understand this customer base as much as we possibly can and try and keep on top of that, and if possible, try and get ahead of the game on that. We need to make sure then we can take that information and actually implement it so the customer gets an experience which is relevant to them. We need to understand that the range itself, our range, needs to change. We talked about it in the panel. There was a diversification that we said that pretty much everybody's been doing all the way through this period. How do we make sure we can implement that? And how do we make sure the customer ultimately can stay on top of their orders? How do they make sure they place the orders? How do they make sure all the way through the process that they've got the best possible visibility, and ultimately into self-serving, which I'll come on to in a second, and then managing the margin through dynamic sell pricing, so to try and keep on top of what's happening with the cost price. So that's at an absolute top level. I'm just going to delve into in a little bit more detail. So not absolutely exhaustive, but I think you probably agree some of the really key things that we want to talk about. So how can technology help us to work around these key trends? So first thing is self-service now matters more than ever for B2B, as we've seen it happening for B2C for years. So I won't dwell too much on this, but basically there are a series of, this is from some statistics pulled together from a McKinsey report. First one is overall customers, so end customers and business customers are now doing much more research up front. So there's a massive increase there in terms of how the shop window is actually is helping them to actually understand what they want to be buying. They're then evaluating that purchase, so they're jumping around, understanding, they're doing maybe cost price, sale price comparisons, product comparisons, and we need to, again, you can see a huge and even bigger switch towards that in B2B to follow what we see in B2C already. Customers actually self-serving on the order itself, so actually being able to place the order themselves rather than necessarily maybe traditionally over the phone, etc. And then reordering on the post-order process as well, being able to go in, understand what's happening with their order, place those orders again, and then obviously make sure that they understand, as I said just now, around having the best visibility around what's happening with those orders. So these just come at some of the key things. I said it came from this McKinsey report from 2019 to 2020, the kind of shift we've seen. So B2B kind of going down the way that we've seen B2C going already to a certain extent. So massively relevant for us. Now, there are some benefits for this, and we've seen this. This is from our data, from Office Power data, over the last 18 months or so. So we can see 2 years, in fact. So in terms of average order size, we've seen actually when customers are placing orders themselves, there's on average 17%, the average order size is on average 17% higher. So when they're able to go in, understand, do all those other things I just said, place the order themselves. We're also seeing that then leads through into the GM. So the gross margin is also around 12% higher. So again, this is from our data. So if we can actually facilitate customers to go through all of those processes we just talked about and place the orders themselves and have visibility of those orders, there is actually a benefit there for us, and we have seen there's been a benefit there.
Actually, typically the driver in this business for higher GM is actually less, well, two things, I think. One is because I digged into this because I was fascinated by it. One is that there isn't a discussion around the sale price. In other words, they're accepting the sale price. Now, you could argue that if they wanted a discussion around the sale price, they would go to another channel. So you have to take this data. You know, if I want to negotiate, it's a large order, I'm just not going to place the order online. So I think that's one of it. The second bit that I discovered is that there is a tendency, and I'm not saying in all businesses, your businesses or anything, but I found a tendency for this, which scares me, which is this last price paid. So in other words, what's your price for that? Or what's my price for that? And you look into the back office system, that was the last price paid, that's what the price is. David brought up an excellent point earlier that cost price inflation, let's say 15% over two to 3 years. So therefore, if you are doing last price paid, it's quite a challenge. And also it's because there's a lot in dealer world, I think, there's a lot of sales through service. Okay, possibly not on most of the businesses here, but in smaller dealers, it's a sell through service. So therefore, you're offering a service. This is the price I'm getting to the product to you, rather than having a conversation about the fact that paper's gone up, 9% in the last whatever. So I think there's some stuff in that, but I think overall, this is the trend that we see with self-serve for the right transaction.
So the core of all of this, what's the customer all about? What are they doing at the moment? We know they've all changed. Lots of people have gone home. Are they coming back? We're not really sure. When are they coming back? So the key trends that this is kind of talking to is so obviously the rise in e-commerce, so that changing customer behavior, and then the physically and obviously kind of electronically. So where are they going and where are they sitting physically and where are they actually shopping and what are they trying to get? So the key thing here, we think, is to have a single accurate view of who the customer is. So a single customer database, basically. So a single version of the truth. Who is the customer? How do we gather information about them on what they're buying? How do we make sure that we understand where they are as much as possible, how big their business is, maybe how big the business was, and we can sort of see how things are changing. So gathering that together, building this single profile of the customer, and really understanding, as it says on here, behaviors and their consumption patterns. Now, a key sort of techie aspect to all of this is that we need to make sure that all the different aspects of the tech stack are integrated as much as they possibly can be. So historically, it could have been a case where I've got my customer database over here, but I can't necessarily use it in order to integrate it through to my email database or integrate it through to my front end to understand so personalize the experience. So this is the kind of core of it, right? Right at the back end, how do we make sure we just got the...
I'm going to make a point on that. I think we're all, and please let's open this up if you disagree with what I'm saying. But typically the systems in our industry, so the familiar names are, and no one get offended, Horizon, Prima, Oasis, Pulse, those sorts of ones, okay? They're looking for a full feature set, okay? The problem is that they're probably good in one part, but they're not good in all of it. So what we typically see when we're talking to dealers about what their stack looks like, and by stack I mean their applications, is that they will use a Horizon backend, for example, and then they would have put Evolution on top. Or actually, Prima and Evolution was because that integration, those two businesses were quite close together for a while, so that integration was very good. So that did enable, to a certain extent, a level of a single customer view. But those integrations need to be kept up to date. And as the software is developed, sometimes those integrations fall behind. So that's one of the real problems. And I used to, when speaking to a dealer, and it's about 5 years ago, and Office Power wasn't right for them, I used to say, I think the best stack out there for what you want is probably Prima and Horizon front end. And I don't have that, Evolution front end. I don't have that view anymore, But even then, what's happened is that Primo, quite rightly and excitingly, spending quite a lot of their investment in the US, which means that their UK APIs or UPay integrations are not up to date, which now means that you can place an order on your Evolution website and it doesn't get properly into Primo, or vice versa, change a price in Primo and it doesn't flow through to the front end. Now those are simple transaction points. We're talking about single view of customer data here, because you've got to market to this disparate customer base. So I think that is when we're talking about, will the technology in our sector keep up with this, rapid changes? Well, technology constantly requires significant investment, and therefore, what total cost of ownership will dealers accept for their technology in order for these technology companies, system providers, they're called in our sector, to continue to invest not only on those integrations but building out their features to meet the changing market. That is one of the challenges I think that we've got in the technology in our sector.
Great. So that's given us our kind of the base, right? As in we have our view of our customer. Now let's start to get a little bit into actually what do we want to do with that. So how do we want to actually implement something around that? So similar trends here, e-commerce, customers behaving in varied ways ever increasingly. So what do we actually want to do here to have what we call a multi-channel customer contact strategy, which is a bit of a mouthful, but ultimately, fundamentally, we want to, again, I'll open them up. So we want to be in a situation where we can, to a certain extent, reactively, but also really importantly, proactively, understand who these customers are and therefore talk to them in the right way, right? That's the sort of the core of it. So we want to, as examples, be able to carry out gap analysis to identify what they're purchasing, how we might want to cross-sell, how we might want to upsell, and therefore ultimately implement that into our contact strategy, whether it's into email or onto the site. We want to make sure that we really understand what they want to be buying and how we can sort of expand that out. We want to have this, so predictive analysis. So as I said, we want to make sure we can understand what we think based on those trends, what they're going to be buying, very importantly, when they're going to be buying it, what's the mean time between orders, when might it be sensible to reach out to them and say, oh, you bought all of these before, and yeah, you might want to buy them again. And now actually, interestingly, at the moment, we're trying to apply that even on a sort of macro scale, because we know lots of customers have almost become basically kind of dormant over the last year. Maybe they've gone home, maybe they've been furloughed. So actually understanding what they even were buying back in kind of March time or February, March last year, and going, well, we know you're coming back to the office. This is what we think you might need, and obviously feed that into promotion mechanics and into our communication. And then also having approval processes and cost centers to really truly understand, so that we can give that level of control as well to customers, so they're not just controlling. So we're not just understanding what they're doing, but we're understanding what their entire businesses are doing, basically.
So earlier we talked about the importance of automation, right? Because it drives efficiency. And if you think about the eServe data that we saw, well, that is automation. Okay, customers ordering themselves rather than coming through a salesperson. So that drives efficiency. Added bonus, in theory, it drives AOS and gross margin. The problem with, and this is quite a common view, and I share that view, is that, well, I want to talk to my customer. I don't want to get a computer doing it, because if I'm not talking to my customer, then someone else might be. Now, I agree with that 100%. It's not a customer is online or offline, it's the transaction type. That's I think the critical bit to understand is, so a low emotion, high volume transaction should be done online, okay? And actually the satisfaction is higher when it's done online, because I don't really need to talk to anyone and I want it done quickly, okay? But a high emotion, low volume transaction, that's not a transaction that lends itself well to automation, just by the nature of the dynamics of it. So what I think we're trying to say is that you need a single view of the customer. You need some predictive, if you want to be really efficient, some predictive kind of data analysis to say, well, when is the right time to call that customer? Because we've also got shifting demand patterns. So our salespeople should be trying to find where the demand is, rather than kind of just calling the customer saying, do you need anything? Because calling the customer saying, do you need anything, for a person to do that is very inefficient if a system can do it. So take the transactions that have high levels of loyalty and satisfaction and automate them, and then repurpose your sales team, when sales are 90% of what they previously were, to be cross-selling the high emotion or finding new customers is kind of what we think technology should be supporting in our sector. That makes sense.
Cool. So the next thing is then sort of delving into that a little bit more. So what are the customers and their businesses actually doing? So this hybrid working is another one of the key themes that Nick talked about, right? And we're obviously all very, very au fait with it. So again, similar trends we're talking about here from his piece. So the key thing here is that we're very aware of the fact that it may feel like customers have sort of all disappeared and they've all gone home and therefore they're almost behaving like consumers, especially in some of the ways that we've been talking about just now. But actually, ultimately, they're still businesses, whether they are coming back into the office or actually whether they're trying to control spend or buy for their overall businesses. So the ability to manage these groups of employees and their spend, making sure that they have the ability to control that, the ability to understand what's actually happening, and for us to be able to identify for who they are, and therefore how we should, what kind of technology needs to be there to support them, basically. So to identify who are they're still remote working, but they're returning customers. So we just need to understand how they are, who they are, how they are working with each other, how they trying to think. Basically, what kind of groups within the businesses they are. So are they departments? Are they individuals? Are they overall companies? And who is the person ultimately who needs to have those cost controls to be able to support those purchases, basically. So having those approval workflows and that seniority.
I want to make a point here, which is that this depends on your size of your customer base. If you've got 100 customers, okay, and let's say you're turning over 600-700 grand, right, as a mid to small size dealer, then I know my 100 customers. I don't need a system to tell me that. I've known them for ages. I see them at the golf club. I get all of that. I agree with that. I think there's a dynamic which I see which makes me feel a little bit uncomfortable sometimes when I see dealers like that, which is that the equity value, and most of you, if not all of you, are business owners, and the equity value in your business is it's not only the P&L, but it's also the customer base. Okay, and the customer base is effectively the relationship between the business and you. Now, if you've got salespeople that know those customers inside out, that play golf with them, their kids go to the same school and all of that, then actually the salesperson holds quite a lot of the equity value of the business in your hands. And we've all had salespeople, including me, that have left, and you weigh up the demands of how much you pay them to keep them, or how much of their customer base that they're going to take. Okay. Ultimately, the strength of the relationship between the customer and the business, which is effectively a brand, the strength of the brand, okay, the more equity value you have in your business. And the more that a customer is interacting with the business directly, as in the systems or the software or whatever else it is, then the more equity you're holding onto. And effectively, the balance of power between you as an equity holder and a business holder and the salesperson is slightly shifted. So there's another benefit of trying to drive a multi-channel approach, if that makes sense. And so getting customers to use your software not only for buying but for their servicing needs, and setting them up so that they're sticky by configuring their businesses into your software is a really nice way of, dare I say, disintermediating the relationship between your customers and the salesperson, which I think builds equity in your business.
Thanks, Simon. Yeah, that brings it to life nicely. So the next thing is then, okay, we've kind of worked our way through having the single view of the customer, understanding fundamentally sort of what they want and what they're doing. Now, this is actually how do we apply that to the customer experience itself. So we're now getting into this additional theme from our themes around product diversification. So this is the front-end experience. So how do we take all that information we've just been talking about, and how do we basically get as close to personalization as we possibly can, right? So how do we make sure we really understand who the customers are and make sure that their experience is really relevant to what they are wanting at that particular time on the site. So utilizing that to tailor that experience on the front end, making sure that then not just the product experience and the overall merchandising experience, but also the promotional content, the promotional the banners, the offers are very, very much relevant to that individual as much as we possibly can. So utilizing all that information, and obviously making sure that that is as automated as it possibly can be. So one click and it feeds out across the platform. Very importantly here, so I've kind of talked a little bit about we've been talking about the back end, and you've got this database and you've got the understanding of the customer. It's kind of pointless if it doesn't all link through into what the front end is actually doing. So again, that integration. So Simon pulled out a few examples there of how systems are, of how the stack of applications in businesses mean that, yes, you can have lots which integrate with each other, but actually having it all in one place, right? As in, so it's truly integrated, means that the web front end itself is really utilizing this information. And then really making sure, this is really important, so it's consistent across the different channels. Again, it's easy to relatively easy to bolt on different systems, whether it's email systems or whether it's web systems or promotional mechanics, but actually making sure that they are truly consistent all the way through. So the customer's getting exactly the experience that your design team, your merchandising team, your marketing team are designing for them, or you yourselves are designing for them. So that's very, very important here. So it's kind of almost knits it together, everything that we've just been talking about, making sure that ultimately that information can feed its way through into the front end, and that the team themselves have the best possible ability to be directed basically where's most profitable, right? We need to make sure that they can see where are the conversion rates high, where are they low, where are the click-through rates high, and be able to point them in the direction of where on the site is going to be most profitable.
I think this is also a real opportunity for cross-sell, because if you can get your customers interacting with you in a digital way for the right type of transaction, whether it be a service transaction or a commercial transaction, then you have an opportunity to communicate with them personally through digital channels, as well as personally through offline or sales channels. And to do that, you need to make sure that you want to communicate them with things that you want them to do. You want to change behavior. Now, cross-selling into I had some great conversations with David and with Tom at lunch about how they were able, and a lot of dealers have, and I think this is amazing, to very quickly, fill the gap of the loss of office supply sales during the pandemic with selling PPE or other emerging categories. And we heard earlier about kind of selling CSR and B Corp and all of that. So that's a quite expensive, but can be very fruitful, right? Personal sales process offline. If you can replicate even a bit of that online, then you're into cross-sell mechanic. But to do that, you need the data and the promotional tools to say, this person hasn't bought facilities or cleaning products or whatever. I'm going to put a richer offer to them on that, because I want them to know that I sell it. I want them to see that I can sell it, and I can get them buying it, and then slowly I can claw back the margin, as all businesses do, right? Win them on price and then bring back the margin on service over time. A digital platform should really be able to do that, not to completely divorce the need for the person-to-person sell, which is critically important, don't get me wrong, but to support it in a multi-channel way. And for that, you need the data, and then you need the ability to be able to service that data in the marketing mix, the 4 Ps or whatever you want in the digital channel. I think that's what we're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. So this has kind of got us as far nearly as the transaction itself, as it were. So let's take this trend of diversification that a little bit further. Now, clearly there's the actual mechanics here of how do we actually manage that range. So we've all been able to a certain extent, diversify, and we were talking about it earlier on. But actually, having the ability in the system to truly have product information management, or PIM, so managing multiple catalogs, that means that actually, as and when new products are coming online, that we can be managing those, and we can be making sure that the information associated with those is accurate, right? Obviously, there's the integration with as many suppliers as you possibly can. We know that needs to be growing all the time, especially, and we need to be able to change onto that often very, very quickly. So how do we integrate suppliers in? How do we make sure there's as consistent a data format as possible, and that ultimately that data, that product data, whether it's the imagery or the attribution or anything, that all feeds through. Now, again, kind of similar to the previous one, there's no point doing all of that unless you can control what the customer actually sees on the front end. So the website hierarchy itself, and making sure that the structure of the website can be changed as often as possible, and it does match up with the range that we're sourcing, and ultimately, obviously, all linked back to the customer need.
Tom, I'm going to borrow your phrase. So Tom talked, we were laughing, not raucously laughing, but wryly laughing about we're using the single source now rather than the one-stop shop. One-stop shop is yesterday, don't use that. It's now single source. And if you're going to be a single source, then you need to be able to add new floors into your department store easily and quickly. And that is not only in the back end, but it's in the front end too. So being able to adapt quite quickly the way that your website can range, or not only your website, your digital channels can range, quickly diversifying product catalogs is really important if you want to be a single source. So it's not only about being able to promote them. Historically, the way that has happened in our sector has been quite slow. So I want to do some promotional gifting. I'm going to do a punch out to one of the providers. It's a separate system, doesn't always integrate with the back end. The sales will be on the telephone. It will just be a reskinned version of a provider of that. The same with print, the same with workwear, all of that. Now that's fine, but that customer experience is a bit clunky and it's not overly efficient. And so in a Nirvana world, you want to be able to add these products quickly into your range, into your back end, and then you want to be able to merchandise them, range them, promote them into your front end as well. I think that's what our technology needs to do as we see these trends.
Absolutely. So that's kind of covered off a lot of the elements that we can kind of really directly control ourselves, whether it's the customer data or it's the product, and how we range it. Now, here we go. We also need to make sure that there's the ability, right, and the systems in the market need to be able to adapt to the fact that the supply chain has been disrupted and is consistently fluctuating still, and probably will do to a certain extent, whether it's based on the fact that raw material shortages in the Far East, or whether it's worker shortages like we were talking about earlier on, or if it's traffic jams in the Suez Canal. You know, there are issues there that are just going to happen that we need to be able to adapt to, right? So that ultimately impacts the customer in the way that we need to make sure that they have as much visibility as they possibly can of all of those elements. So whether it's the visibility of the order itself, so the confirmation, the progress of the order, obviously integration there as well with tracking. So with the couriers themselves, the sort of the last mile, as it were, making sure that customers can see as much of that information as is possible through those integrations. Also, the ability to configure for different types of fulfillment. Now we know that that's changed, whether it's people working from home and therefore we need to be able to deliver to home addresses, or whether it's ultimately going back to sort of white glove services, eventually maybe delivering to receptions on a particular floor. So need to make sure that we can that the systems can handle that. Now, clearly, equally, stock management is really, really key. So not just understanding what stock you have, but really having that ability to analyze and forecast and understand what cover is going to be there, and be able to work with your suppliers to understand when there might be shortages, when there's going to be issues. How do you make sure you can switch suppliers based on the integrations we've been talking about? How do you make sure that you can work ahead with the suppliers and understand when those issues are going to happen and how you can adapt to it? So not only making sure that ultimately the customer has the best visibility of the order itself, but making sure actually you just have the best possible availability in the first place, of course. And then the sort of last but not least around this point is, we talked about self-serve, right? We talked about how B2B is switching more towards the kind of consumer habits that we were a little bit more used to as consumers in B2C. And for customers to be able to self-serve when it comes to raising queries, understanding what's happening with their queries, ultimately getting the solution to those queries, and making sure that customer service teams themselves have, again, that full understanding of what's happening with that, as in they can look it up, they can look up the customer history, see what's happening with this particular order, see what's happening with the query around that, and ultimately obviously resolve it as quickly as possible. So there's a few points in there all the way through, obviously all ultimately to do with the customer experience, but making sure that availability and the integration with suppliers is there as well. So this is very much around how can technology platforms help you to react to things that are kind of out of your control, and then give the best possible experience to customers when you know how you're going to adapt to those.
Biggest trend we see at the moment on this one is the different types of fulfillment. So if you think about the gradual shift to drop ship, and now it went rapidly and now it's coming back again, right? And what that means, and actually most of the dealers that we're talking to want to be able to have a much more varied way of fulfilling a product. And a lot of them have relationships now they might not have had, but they might have had, but using small, now using much larger with their own couriers. They might be using Val for drop ship, and they might be using their own van. They might be pick wrapping label some product. They might be palletizing other product. They might be buying product direct from a vendor, right? So pre-pandemic, that whole supply chain workflow piece was actually simplifying. What's happened is become super complicated as we try and maintain the level of customer service that we need to. And the technology needs to be flexible enough to not only to support that increasing flexible ways of delivering the product based on unit economics, but also enable the customer experience to be as challenging but as seamless as possible. And technology can help with that, but it's, you know, it wasn't typically in our industry, it's not set up brilliantly to do that.
So that's kind of taken us all the way through the transaction, really. And now this is the final point around these trends and the tech features. So this is around cost prices and how they're fluctuating and how ultimately you can manage the impact of that. So the ability to set dynamic sale pricing based on how those cost prices are fluctuating. So be able to set a margin, understand that as the cost prices are changing, you're not going to suddenly get walloped when the cost prices go up, and that your system is able to handle that. Also, at the other end of the spectrum, being able to have customer-specific pricing, so be able to control pricing at the more granular level. So if you have a series of SKUs that you know are really, really important, you have to win on, have the ability to be able to do that, and obviously equally working in tandem with the top piece there. And then also, we talked quite a lot about, as much as we possibly can, having this forward-thinking view, which is kind of a bit of a golden thread all the way through all of these. If we can be utilizing some of the data we've been talking about and forecasting what's going to be happening with customer behavior, and ultimately what's as much as possible going to be happening with cost price, be able to understand that and have as much predictive modeling as possible. So actually you can start to say what might be happening next, and what kind of impacts might I be having, and therefore how do I mitigate against those as much as possible. So there's a series of points there, and there's lots and lots of obviously complexity behind how all this works, but this is some of the kind of things that are necessary to almost sort of pull it all together, because ultimately if the prices aren't right, then almost a lot of the rest of it doesn't matter. So yeah, as I said, last but by very, very much not least, this was the kind of final trend.
This is scary. Some of the sale price models that I see in dealers supported by the software, because it really is. I mean, it's fine if there isn't a great deal of fluidity or volatility either in sale pricing or cost pricing, but as soon as that does happen, then it exposes some of the lack of agility that the systems or the tools or the processes have to manage that volatility, and it can really hurt. It really can, and obviously the larger your business, the more percentage base points can really not fall out the bottom or not. So yeah, margin management through price management is really important, and a lot of the systems still kind of rely on the software houses or the system providers uploading which seems nuts, but uploading the wholesalers' cost prices, and then of course you have to then translate those very volatile cost price changes into sell prices for the right customers at the right time to make sure that you discover some elasticity or hold on to loyalty without caning margin. And actually, this is the bit that scares me the most in my business, if I'm honest, because it's rapidly changing.
So I'll hand over to you entirely in a second, Simon. But so we've kind of worked our way through, haven't we? All the core of the single view of the customer. How do we actually utilize that to contact the customer? How do we make sure that then that ultimately feeds into their experience, the products that they're able to see? How do we manage it? And you can see there's so many different elements to that. There's sort of, as I said, kind of within our control to a certain extent. Then there's the pieces that are outside our control, so the supply chain, the cost prices to a large extent, which just means that there's a lot of pieces there, a lot of pieces of the jigsaw that mean that ultimately if the technology really needs to try and back us up as much as we possibly can to be able to handle a lot of these quite new or ever-changing trends and challenges. So these were our thoughts. It's obviously not absolutely comprehensive, as I said. It just hopefully gives you a bit of an idea of where we think technology needs to kind of step in and support us as much as possible as we change. So shall I hand over? Do you want to swap places?
Thank you, Harry, very much. You were not in the paratroopers, I believe, but you could have, because I parachuted you in last night and you did a great job. So thank you very much indeed. That's brilliant. Well done. Okay, I've nearly finished. I just wanted to talk about the concept of stack, and then I've sat Robbie here in case he wants to kick me, but I'm then going to just do show an independent review of some of the features and how they stack up in the software in our industry. Okay, so this stack is an enterprise stack, and I just want to explain the concept of it. This is Advio's stack, right? Advio aren't really around anymore. I think they're very small in France, Robert, but apart from that, they're not. And Jaime and Luis came to us about 5 years ago. They were the CEO and the CTO of Advio, and they said, we want to put in some technology. Can we have a look at your technology? And we spent quite a lot of time with them, and this was the stack that they were looking at. And this basically is what I call the pretty woman stack. You know, when she goes into the shop and she goes, I want everything, with Richard Gere's card or whatever. I haven't seen the movie for a while. This is where you go in and you got no worry about what you're going to buy, because price is not an option. So they went out to buy this, which at the time, now SAP is now integrated with Hybris. SAP bought Hybris, but at the time, this was the stack where you would go, and these are the different functional modules that stack would give you. Now you'd have to be, circa, I don't know, 300-400 million to be able to be the Richard Gere in this circumstance, okay? But that's what it looks like. And what you need to do, and I might be being a little bit salesy here, you need to find a platform that in theory does all of that. Now this is an old slide, I didn't have time to repurpose it, but what I'm trying to say is if you go into Dealerland and look at this, then you might have a Horizon backend, you might have I can't remember what they're called, but some kind of dynamic or I something CRM system, okay? You then might have a warehouse management system, you might not. You then might have a different shopping cart that sits on top, right? And that's the kind of equivalent of doing that. The reason I haven't done that for our sector is because I don't feel qualified to do it. I have used Horizon and Horizon Web, but I haven't used any of the others. And secondly, I don't want to make this too edgy or competitive. But I just wanted to explain the challenges of having stacks. That cost 9 million to put in. They didn't put it in, right? Because they failed halfway through. In fact, they failed at SAP. But when they, which is quite a common failure point. But once they had, assuming they had got that in, you've then got the running costs, which are exceptional, because you're having to manage all these integrations to try and make sure you get a single view. Now that does work for very large organizations with very deep pockets. What we've got to try and do is find a stack that does that. So we're launching this new product called Power Select, okay? So why are we launching it? Well, at the center of what we do is our technology, okay? Our technology is used by independent businesses, it's used by our trading businesses, Euroffice and UK Office Direct, and it's also used, wrapped up in a kind of all-you-can-eat business model with Office Power. And a lot of the times, and Kim will say I told you so, because she told me this 9 years ago, but a lot of the times when we speak to dealers, they go, we love your technology, it's the best out there, we just don't want all the services. Okay, we don't want you, and the full Office Power, we do the invoicing model. We don't want you to do our invoicing, or customer service, actually, we're a sizable dealer, we don't need you to do our invoicing, okay, or our customer service, because there's no saving. Typically, the benefit of that is aggregated cost savings. There's no savings for you doing that. So we spent the last 18 months decoupling the relationship between the software and the services, and we're relaunching that, or we're launching it in a product that we're calling Power Select. And Power Select is the plan that if you don't have your own plan, or if you can't persuade someone on your tables, and we've got very persuasive panelists, but if you can't persuade someone on your table to expose their plan, then you can borrow this one, okay? That's why I'm saying it. So effectively, very quickly, at the heart of everything that we do is our software platform. As I've said, when you license it, it comes with some software-related services, which you would expect: training, partner success, onboarding. Okay, you shouldn't have a SaaS-metered software platform, okay, without some software services provided with it. So at the bare bones, everyone gets that. Typically, you then, as what we call power full, you can see what we've done there, but a full office power product suite, you'd get all of these services, okay? And what we've done is we've grouped them into 2 modules or 2 packages, and you can basically take one package or the other. And our market research, and when we spoke to you, said this is the best way of dividing it. And basically, this is the tech package. You get everything in the tech. You then get what we call the commercial services package. That is our buying and our marketing, okay? And they are packaged together because they work well together. So you get our group terms, and then you can have our operational services package, which is where we do order fulfillment, customer service, invoicing, cash collection, much more deeper kind of integrated partnership. So you can basically have one or the other, or you can have them both, which is powerful, okay? Now, I'm not gonna say anything more than that, but what if on your, and Chris will explain more how we're gonna play with this, but on your table, if you don't have anything to play with, then play with the concept that we plan to separate our technology from our services, and you can riff, if you want, on whether that's a good plan or a bad plan. Now, if you do it, that's great, because there's also a hidden mole on your table of someone from Office Power, and we're getting free consultancy on whether you guys think it's a good idea or not. If you don't do it, then that's fine. Use your plan, because ultimately then, you know, I would, if I was on your table, I would put my hand up and say, here's my plan. I wouldn't give away all the juicy bits, but I'd say, here's my plan, because you've got some very intelligent people sitting around the table that will then riff on your plan.